keep in mind that if you took today's course within this current CAM renewal cycle at any time in the past with us, with Andrew, or with anybody else, if it's the same class you took today, that you're taking today in this cycle, the DBPR will not process the credit for you. So just keep that in mind. We just had a couple of issues like that recently, where somebody came in to take the same class as an elective instead of as an IFM, but the DBPR will not process it if you've taken the same class within this cycle. So just keep that in mind as we're nearing the end of the renewal cycle for this year. With that said, I want to now turn it back over to Marielle. And again, I'll go over that again a little bit later. I know I did it quickly.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And there's some great information in that evaluation form. So definitely look out for that later in the presentation. I just want to quickly say a big thank you to our sponsors of this series who are making it possible, many of whom are going to be presenting courses, information, providing resources to you guys throughout the series over the summer. So that's City Quiet Windows and Doors, the Falcon Group, Hotwire, KBR, Nouveau Florida, Oracle Profitability, The Paving Lady, Plastridge Insurance, thank you very much, South State Bank, United Professional Engineering, Vote HOA Now, and thank you so much to our sponsors. I just want to also mention anybody who possibly has joined us today from Arizona. Most of you, of course,
We lost you there for a second, Marielle. We want to thank everybody over in Arizona as we continue to grow out in the great state of Arizona where it's hot, but hey, it's a dry heat, right? So with that said, let's turn it back over to Andrew to get started. And Marielle will join us back when undoubtedly she's probably having some weather issues down there with the all the rain and storms in the South Florida area. So with that said, Andrew, take it away, sir. The screen sharing should be enabled for you.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone taking some time. Man, yeah, we picked the right day for a hurricane preparedness course. Absolutely. It's nasty by us, but all the more reason to focus on this, right? I know a lot of us have been here for a long time. I grew up in South Florida, so this is something that and I know a lot of us are familiar with. Every year, it's certainly a good refresher. And I just put this up there. I assume this shared okay. I'm kind of monitoring the chat. Let me know.
Yeah, we're looking good. We're looking good, Andrew.
Perfect. So the graphic that I chose for the title for the cover for our course today was very intentional. It shows the 2024 forecast for hurricane season this year. And it's a little bit doom and gloom in that the forecast for this year is the most aggressive forecast that we've ever. These forecasts are less than positive, but this one in particular stood out because it's literally the highest above average that the NOAA has ever projected, with the historical average for named storms being 14 in any one given season. They're projecting 23 this year. 7 hurricanes on average, projected 11 for this year. So it's something that is even this year, and what the point of today is going to kind of be is to talk through some of these items and hopefully help everyone kind of put together a checklist, right, where you can prepare prior to the storm, best practices during the storm, and then what to do after the storm. And then after the course, we're going to kind of do a market update, because we're also in a very unique time where we're starting to see a very positive insurance market. And I know it's probably been a long time since anyone has heard that from the insurance industry, but the past few months have actually been relatively very positive from a renewal perspective for associations that we work with. So knock on wood, we have to get through hurricane season, but if all goes well, I think we are on track for a much healthier insurance market in the coming months. So just a little bit about me, and then we'll kind of jump in. I specialize exclusively in working with community associations, condos, HOAs at Plastridge Insurance. Our agency is a family-owned agency. We work with about 1,300 community associations in South Florida. I graduated with a degree in risk management and insurance from Florida State. Grew up in the industry, so my mother was in it, my grandmother was in it. I'm third generation in insurance. We have a potential fourth generation insurance nerd. We have a 16-month-old. So Jeff, I appreciate our course today being a little bit later morning than usual. We're sleeping less than we have. I grew up in South Florida, so born and raised here, and I'm of course a state approved LCAM property manager C instructor. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, and again, I'm hopeful that this will kind of be a checklist of items for everyone to kind of take away and start having these conversations now, as opposed to when we're staring down a storm or in that cone that we all are familiar with. We're going to talk about deductibles. Obviously, the hurricane and the wind deductibles are significant. They're typically a percentage of the building or building's value. So funding those deductibles and having a plan in place is very important. We're going to
Folks, are you seeing anything? I lost the feed
I
for
think we
everybody.
lost Andrew for
Okay.
hopefully a second. It seems like he'll
Okay.
bring us back.
Yeah, hang on, guys. This is undoubtedly, I've done this for since the beginning of COVID, and this does not happen often. This is
No.
undoubtedly a weather-related issue. We all love technology when it works. But while we wait for Andrew to come back, Marielle's going to contact him now via phone and text and let him know that we lost him. And while we're doing that, next week, on the 19th, we will have Lisa McGill from K-Ben to Rembom. She is going to go over, you're going to see her twice during the summer webinar series. Next week, she's going to do the Homeowners Association version of the legislative session update. Lots of new laws, particularly for HOAs, which does not happen often. Usually it's very, very condo heavy. This year, it's pretty darn even. In fact, the seesaw probably tips in the direction of more happening for HOAs and also for board members. There's some board member education requirements that are happening. So Lisa will fill you in on all of that. And then later in the summer series, we will have her back to talk about the condominium side of things and what's happening with the condominium legislation and how it affects all of Florida's legislation. And something in particular that we want to know while we wait for Andrew to come back is when you fill out the evaluation later, you know, last week we had a great turnout on June 5th. Marcy Kravitz was here talking about a lot of human resources topics. And then it turned into something that I love and what I feel both Marielle and I each feel is not covered enough. You know, a lot of CAM education, board member education, it's very textbook heavy. Anybody can memorize stuff and take a test and pass it. All right. That's anybody can develop that skill. But last week we covered a lot of, Marielle, how would you say, a lot of intangibles, a lot of
I think a lot of the kind of gray area, the stuff that, happens on boards, happens in communities, and a lot of people
Yep.
don't know how to deal with it. And I
Yep.
think it was a really cool space that was created for people to share some of their grievances or things that, they've tried this, they've tried that, but I still can't get through to this person, or
Right.
this person is still misbehaving, and how do we handle it? So I think that was beautiful to bring to light. I hope we get to do more of that in the series. I know Andrew is back, and you guys are here. So let's turn it back over. I know most of you are in Florida and probably experiencing some weather. So we all are, we're with it, Andrew. We know this is happening to me. I think I dropped off before. So here we go. Hopefully we won't have to have that happen again. But we're all in it together. So let's get back on track.
I will shut up now. Back to it.
Jeff, I think what we're going to have to do, if it's
Yep.
okay, sent you the slides in a PowerPoint. I had to switch to my phone. So do you mind clicking through those as we go?
Yeah, I could do that. That doesn't take any voice or coughing issues. I'm happy to do that. Hang on.
Teamwork. Thanks for bearing with us, guys.
I mean, no better day to, I guess, to do a hurricane preparedness course than,
Seriously.
oh, crazy. So where did I kind of fall off right away?
I think you were talking about, well, we did hear about your beautiful 16-month-old. So I think that's kind of where we left off.
So let's go ahead and jump down, Jeff, to the deductible. One more. Let's start there. So this slide, this is the point of this course, right? Is to gonna be to kind of help everyone create a checklist. And the slide here touches on the deductibles. Most of us are familiar with the fact that these deductibles are significant, right? When we're talking about the hurricane deductibles, the wind deductibles, they're high because they're typically a percentage of the building values. So when you have any other type of loss, a fire, if there's water damage, theft, vandalism, lightning, your deductible is typically going to be a flat number. It's usually going to be $5,000 per occurrence or in that range. Whereas this deductible is significant. It's a percentage of the value of the building if we have a hurricane. So easy math, right? If your building's worth $1 million and you have a 3% deductible, then that deductible is going to be $30,000. So much higher. Now, most of us are familiar with that, but what I've found a lot of board members, a lot of managers are not always familiar with is that there's different ways you can structure that deductible to try and make sure that that higher deductible comes into play as little as possible. And there's really three ways you can do that. You can have a hurricane deductible, which is very, very specific, right? A hurricane deductible means that that higher percentage deductible is only going to apply to hurricanes. So 74-mile-an-hour winds deemed a hurricane by the NOAA, that is the higher percentage deductible. If you have that, everything else wind-related is going to be a much lower deductible. So if it's not a hurricane, maybe it's a named storm, maybe we have a tornado, maybe we have a crazy thunderstorm like we're having right now, anything other than a hurricane, your deductible is going to be much lower. So you can also have a named storm deductible, and that's much more broad, right? Now it's not just hurricanes. Now that higher deductible is going to apply to anything with a name from the NOAA. So that can be a named storm, a hurricane, of course. Anything that's given a name is going to be subject to that higher percentage deductible. And then you can also have a wind deductible, which is the most broad. And that means that the higher deductible is going to apply to literally anything wind related. So hurricane, tropical storm, named storm, tornado, crazy thunderstorm, anything wind related will fall under that higher deductible if you have a wind deductible. The reason I bring this up and emphasize this is because the past 3 years, as we've kind of navigated a very challenging market, a lot of associations have either been pushed involuntarily or have elected to take the wind or named storm deductibles as opposed to the hurricane deductibles. And what we've seen the past couple of months is that carriers, as the market is transitioning, are budging on a lot of these terms and things like this. So the hurricane deductibles are becoming very relevant again and available. So when you're approaching your renewal this year, I would encourage everyone to ask that question and to make sure, if it's available, that you're potentially looking at a hurricane deductible, because it's much more favorable for the community. Do you mind changing slides, Jeff? So we, in addition to structuring that deductible so that it comes into play as little as possible, there's also 2 ways that that deductible comes into play at all. And when you have that higher deductible, that percentage deductible, it's always either going to be on a calendar year basis or on a per occurrence basis. And the difference between those two, if it's a calendar year deductible, that means that the deductible erodes throughout the year and resets January 1st. The reason that's important is because if you were here in 2004, I was brutal, basically 45 days back-to-back hurricanes, and the associations that had calendar year deductibles were in a much better position, because when that first hurricane hit, I think it was Charlie was the first one. If your community had a $500,000 deductible and Charlie did $250,000 worth of damage, while you may not have hit your deductible going into Francis 15 days later, right, was $250,000 less. So the calendar year is really valuable because you know that you always have one deductible every year for storm season, whereas per occurrence deductibles are exactly what they sound like. It means that every single storm, that deductible is resetting. So in that scenario, 2004, the communities that had per occurrence deductibles, every single storm, it was a brand new deductible. So the difference is meaningful. If your community in 2004 had a $500,000 calendar year deductible, you had a $500,000 deductible. If your community had a $500,000 per occurrence deductible, you had 4 separate $500,000 deductibles, $2 million in deductibles. So this is very similar to the hurricane versus wind, in that the calendar year is becoming very available again. So we haven't had the luxury of having these conversations in the past 3 years, but we're getting to a point in the market where you can push back on some of these terms and changes, and carriers will start to budge. So it's a very important part of your renewal process. Can you go to the next, Jeff? So we touched a little bit in the intro, and maybe I cut out, I'm not sure, but with regards to funding these deductibles, the deductibles are significant, right? We've established that. So I always encourage my clients, and when I'm doing these courses, to think about this, right? To have a mechanism in place to fund that deductible quickly. Because if your association has a $500,000 deductible, that's a significant amount. And I would be curious if you were here in 2005, right? That was the year we had Hurricane Wilma. I don't think I'll ever get it out of my brain. I think it's burned into my memory. But for years, literally for 2 years following that storm, what we saw was entire communities with tarps over their roof. If you flew within 48 months after Hurricane Wilma, you would literally look down and it would look like just a sea of blue roofs.
Andrew, would you agree that this is when it's important for boards and managers to have good relationships with their service providers? I'm not saying that it works every single time, but the squeaky wheel sometimes gets shoved to the top of the list. You know what I mean?
Oh
To
yeah.
get things taken care of.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the whole point. The whole point is having these conversations,
Right.
and establishing a plan and these relationships
Right.
before it's too late. And that's what we saw in 2005. I mean, that's literally the reason this happened. It wasn't necessarily because the insurance company wasn't paying claims or anything like that. In a lot of cases, Jeff, what we saw was these roofers' demand at this time was so unbelievably
So damn busy.
Yeah. So these roofers were literally going door to door.
Yeah.
And if your community wasn't in a position to cut a check for a down payment to replace the roofs, I mean, these guys moved on.
Yeah.
And by the time you assess for your deductible and put the funds together, the line was 12 months, 18
Yeah.
months. So that's hugely problematic. And that's why I always encourage our clients to establish a line of credit or some mechanism to fund that deductible quickly.
Yeah.
The next slide, if you don't mind, Jeff. So this is a lot of words. It doesn't really matter the specifics, but this is something that doesn't get talked about near enough. And we were talking about assessing for that deductible, which is how most associations handle it. I don't know about everyone on this call, but I've never been involved in an assessment meeting that everyone was excited about. Right? These are the challenging conversations, but what's really important, and it's a really neat thing for everyone to remember, is that your owners, right? Everyone that has an HO6 unit owners policy or an HO3 single family policy, if you're an HOA, every single homeowner's policy per Florida statute includes coverage for loss assessment. So what that means is if your association has to assess to fund your hurricane deductible, your owners, and a very critical part of this is obviously they have to have coverage and they have to have the type of coverage that's being assessed for. So if it's a hurricane related claim, they have to have hurricane coverage in their homeowner's policy for this to trigger. But if they do, then what the homeowner can do is once they get assessed, they can take the assessment letter, submit it to their insurance company, and the insurance company will reimburse them for the loss assessment. I don't know why this doesn't get talked about very often. I always emphasize it because these assessment meetings I've found, and this is kind of applicable to anything, when you're having a challenging conversation, if you're able to present the community not only with an assessment, but also with a solution, it is received exponentially better. And we saw this firsthand after Hurricane Irma in 2017. What we did with our association clients is we set up town hall meetings. Literally, we went in and kind of just had a very open, transparent meeting and encouraged everyone, all of the owners, to bring their homeowners policies to the meeting. And what we did with our associations that hit their deductible, we helped the board and the manager write the loss assessment letters, and we included the policy language from everyone's individual homeowners policy in the loss assessment letter that the board sent out to the community. So what that did, we had 100% success rate because the owners were getting the assessment. Yes, they had to pay the assessment, but then because we very thoughtfully wrote that letter, they were able to take it, submit it to the insurance company, and get reimbursed for that. It's very difficult for an insurance company to deny a loss assessment letter when you're literally using their policy language in the letter. So this is just an example of some of the things I would encourage everyone to kind of write down and put on this hurricane season checklist that can be invaluable when the time comes.
Hey, Andrew, I'm assuming you're on a phone right now to make this go more smoothly with the weather. So I'm going to read a question that looks like it's pertinent.
Yeah.
So Sean is asking, if a unit owner does have wind coverage and he highlights wind in capital letters, then a hurricane-related loss assessment might be paid for by the unit owner's HO6 loss assessment coverage. Not everyone carries wind, from what I've heard anecdotally in my association. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's the key, is that they have to have the wind coverage. So if you have, Sean, if there's an owner that has a homeowner's policy that does not include wind, they're not going to be able to recoup for a wind-related loss assessment.
Okay. And then Sherry's asking to please say more about this. What insurance policy will cover this reimbursement for the owner's insurance? I believe you just said their homeowner's policy. Is she correct?
Yeah, it's the homeowner's policy. And Sherry, here's the beautiful thing. Every single one of them has this because it's a statutory requirement. The Florida statutes say if there's a homeowner's policy in existence, the carrier has to offer loss assessment.
Okay. And Marielle, can you take this next one? I'm about to have a coughing fit.
I think I have it here from Laura, and it says, can the loss assessment letter that was submitted adversely affect a resident, i.e., the insurance company drops them at a later date? That's a good question. The concept is similar to having a hurricane claim for the association. The answer is no. It should not have an adverse effect because this is going to fall into the act of God bucket. And with acts of God, the insurance company, in theory, and almost all the time, does not hold that against you. So maybe, Jeff, if we go to the next one, I think I know what it is. Yeah. Okay. So this is an important distinction. Most of us are familiar with this, but I always emphasize it just because it can cause some confusion. So when we talk about hurricanes and when we talk about water damage following a hurricane, there's a major difference between wind or hurricane damage and flood damage. In our world, those are completely different. And the difference is physical damage. That's the key to remember. Physical damage. So if your building sustains physical damage, so tree falls through the building, a window blows out, and then water comes in that way, that is going to be a hurricane claim or a wind claim, and it's going to fall under your property policy. If there's no physical damage, but there's water damage, so there's rising water, right? So say we have a very slow moving storm. And a great example of this was Harvey in Texas. That storm was so brutal because I think that the average speed was 4 or 5 miles an hour. So it was just raining and raining and raining. And what happened in Texas was there was a huge number of flood claims because a lot of homes, a lot of units were not damaged, but the water got so high that it started coming in and around windows and doors. And that's important to know, because if you don't have flood coverage, so a separate policy, you won't have coverage for that in a storm scenario. Again, unless there is physical damage. So I think Kelly has a question with regards to wind-driven rain. So Kelly's question is what about the wind-driven rain that gets behind stucco and the wood gets rotted, but we don't find out about the wood rot until a repair is made? Can this be covered under the loss assessment? So this question, Kelly, there's kind of a lot to unpack and some moving parts. So first off, wind-driven rain, so everyone knows, is very specific. Wind-driven rain means that water was pushed into the building without physical damage. So think about a sliding glass door or a window frame. If it's raining really hard and the wind is gusting at high speeds, if it's pushing the water in around the window or under the doors, that's wind-driven rain, right? So that's a very specific coverage. And Kelly's question is essentially, is that going to be covered if we don't find out about it until a repair is made, right? So if the wood's rotting and if we discover that in the future, it will, Kelly, it is still going to be covered. The one thing about wind-driven rain, though, to keep in mind, is that wind-driven rain is always subject to the higher deductible. So to be honest, we don't see a lot of wind-driven rain claims that meet that deductible. So maybe, Jeff, if we can go to the next one, that'd be great. So, and you can just go ahead and go to the next one, Jeff.
Yeah, I see we jumped the gun on that one earlier.
No, that's okay. But it is important, though, because it's a really critical part of this conversation. This conversation is not just about coverage, right? I mean, this conversation is about, we work with over 1,300 community associations. We've
Right.
seen this not just from the insurance side, right?
Right.
And a lot of this I do personally also.
Right.
So when the storm is coming, and honestly, even before that, so now is when this stuff should be starting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And folks, for those of you who say this guy Jeff opens his mouth way too much, I just want you to know I relate with y'all quite a bit, because for over 18 years, I was part of the team over at a 10,000 resident, 500 acre condominium association with 44 subs and a master. So I feel all of your pain. But Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, that's a great example of how relevant this is, because in these scenarios, look, the reality is that after we have a storm, everyone needs these vendors.
Yeah.
Every roofers, everyone needs mold remediation, landscaping, debris cleanup. So if you can establish these relationships, and honestly, maybe even take it a step further than that, establish these relationships, but you may even want to get these vendors on the calendar. If we're in the cone, I mean, you might want to make a call and say, we'd like to go ahead and schedule an appointment, because having that relationship can, and not to over dramatize this, but can literally be the difference between getting your roofs replaced timely and being in a position where your community is looking up at tarps for years. I mean, it's literally that big of a difference. So it's a really important part of the conversation. You can go to the next one, Jeff. This is really interesting, and this is something else that doesn't get, I feel like, talked about that much, and maybe it's the insurance nerd part of me, but it's a really neat coverage. So when this happens, right after we have a storm, when everyone needs these inspectors and contractors, the pricing goes through the roof. There's always a surge or a spike in the cost associated with this, not just with the labor, but also the materials. If everyone needs lumber, the cost of lumber goes up, supply and demand, right? Some insurance companies will offer a specific additional coverage for this. It's called a spike clause or a margin clause. And this coverage will essentially give you a certain percentage, right? So 15% in addition to your building values, to your insured limit, if we experience a spike in demand. So if your building is insured for 10 million, if you have an additional spike clause or a margin clause in your policy, your carrier at the time of loss, if there's a surge in demand, will actually pay up to 11.5 million as opposed to the 10. So it's a really neat coverage. And again, a lot of this has gotten lost in the past 3 years, but your boards are going to start seeing this stuff resurface as the market transitions to a healthier environment. You can go to the next one, Jeff. So the other piece of vendors, and I know we're kind of jumping back a little bit, but I want to emphasize this. When you're in a scenario with everyone needing vendors, not only are you in a position where if you don't get to the vendors soon, there's going to be a line that forms. The other problem is that after we have a major storm and after there's significant damage and the demand skyrockets, these contractors flock to wherever the damage is. And a lot of these guys, we call them chuck in a truck. They are not ideally, some of them, the contractors that you would want and feel comfortable hiring. So the other piece of this is if you have this established in advance, you not only know that you're going to have a contractor, you know that the contractor that you're going to be engaged with is going to be licensed, they're going to be insured, reputable, and the problem is when demand skyrockets, those companies are the first ones with a line, right? So if you don't have that established, the challenge that your board could be in is you may have a decision, right? It's, do we get in a line for a reputable contractor or potentially talk about hiring a contractor that we would not otherwise feel comfortable using? So that's something a lot of boards don't think about. I always like to emphasize. You can go to the next one, Jeff. And I know, so with time, I'm going to start having you jump around a little bit, Jeff, because I know I got cut off in the beginning, but you can go ahead and go to the next one. Another really critical part of this conversation early is having a hurricane plan. And I know this sounds obvious and this sounds logical, but I'm always surprised with how many associations, how many boards don't have an established plan, right? And it's one thing to say we have a hurricane plan. It's get out of here, hope for the best, right? That's one thing. But to have an actual written physical plan is really meaningful. And I say that because I've seen communities navigate storms with and without that. And it seems to be much more smooth if there's something tangible for everyone to follow. That's the key. Because now this is easy to talk about, but after a storm, when everyone's scrambling, I mean, it's chaos, right? It can be very stressful. So having something that everyone can kind of follow along with, having a checklist and knowing who's responsible for what can help everyone navigate this efficiently. And this should include things like a communication mechanism, whether your community has an email system, text messages, a Facebook page, whatever it may be. I've also heard from a lot of communities that do this, and it's great, I think, is to kind of have floor captains or one or more individuals that are responsible for certain sections of the community, as far as notifying, as far as making sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing. I think that's a really efficient way to help move things forward when you're working on preparing for a storm. I personally do a lot of this stuff, including these two. I encourage everyone to waterproof these documents, important information. We've actually gone so far as to now we will deliver that policy book, light reading, 300 plus pages for everyone to have their policies. But we also put everything on a USB drive now, and it's in a plastic casing, literally the size of your hand. So when we have a storm, you can literally grab that and go, and know that you have all of your insurance documentation handy and ready to go. And then I also encourage everyone to take time-stamped pictures and videos of the community before and after. And I love when we do this panel style, because the legal feedback that I get on this is always fantastic, because it makes sense, right? When you're, I always say I'm of course in the insurance industry, but I certainly don't like everything about it, right? And insurance companies are not always going to do the right thing. I know I'm not surprising anyone, but the reality is that anything you can do as a board, as an association, to position yourself more effectively in a claim situation, it's fantastic. And one of the ways that are really helpful and easy is before and after documentation. And this can be literally walking around the community, taking a video, documenting the state of the community, all of that, and then doing the same thing after. Because I promise you, and I've seen this play out in claim situations, if you have documentation, right, photos, videos of the community before, and photos and videos of the community after, and it doesn't look the same anymore, it's very difficult for an insurance company to navigate a denial through that process. So that's helpful. Maybe go to the next one, Jeff.
Yeah, and what Andrew said is vital. I am not an attorney, but many of you recognize me from working with several attorneys, including the firm associated with this webinar series. And what Andrew said is excellent advice. Have all of the documentation that you can, and don't try to fake it either. There are experts out there that can tell when you've faked a watermark on a photograph or a video. So just do what Andrew suggested, and you should be in better shape than not having it.
Yeah, the other thing too, and this is more of a practical use, if you sat down, right, and tried to write a list of everything that you have,
Yeah.
it's a lot harder than you might think. So, which, by the way, if there's a significant loss, you will have to do. The
Right.
insurance is not just going to cut a check.
Right.
You're document. So if you're having to list everything that was damaged or gone, it's helpful to have a video to kind of
Right.
refresh you're doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Andrew, there's a question in there. Take a look at that real quick. And folks, I just want to say thank you and apologize in the same sentence. Today is a little bit chaotic between the weather, Andrew freezing up, Marielle freezing up. I'm having to share a screen from 1,000 miles away. So thanks for hanging out with us. And again, we apologize, but again, thank you for spending your time with us. Andrew, want to check out that question?
Yeah, so Sherry's question, and this is great because I have a slide on this later, so we can skip that when we get there. But Sherry's question is speaking of insurance companies not doing the right thing. In the past, I've had experience with insurance companies not paying out much after storms or separate incidences such as leaks, etc.
Yeah.
First of all, Sherry, I promise you're not the only one that's had that experience. What is your opinion on hiring a public adjuster? So my opinion on hiring a public adjuster is pretty simple, honestly. It's our recommendation is always to give the insurance company the chance to do the right thing first, right? Turn the claim in, see how it goes. If you feel that as that process progresses, the insurance company is not doing the right thing, by all means, that's when it's time to engage a public adjuster and or an attorney and kind of take the gloves off. And I'm saying this from the perspective of the board is our client, not the insurance company. So we work for the board. And I've had to navigate this multiple times. I've been involved in claims that have gone poorly, and I've helped communities engage a public adjuster and worked with a public adjuster through a claim to get a better result. I always encourage everyone to give the carrier a chance first. And the other thing about public adjusters, Sherry, that's really important to note, and I don't want this to sound any particular way. There's good public adjusters and good and bad public adjusters, just like there's good and bad insurance agents. But the reality, though, that you have to understand is that the vast majority of public adjusters are compensated based on a percentage of the final claim, right? So we're all talking about the insurance market and how difficult it is, and these premium increases we've been seeing. There's a reason, and again, this is a small handful of public adjusters and attorneys that have kind of ruined it for everyone. But if you think about that concept, right, that compensation structure, the bad apple public adjusters, I mean, they're strongly incentivized to inflate the claim as much as possible, and they will. So again, that's the bad ones, but that's what we've seen. So I know that's kind of a longer answer, but it's a little bit of a complicated question. I hope that clarified, Sherry. We can go to the next one, Jeff. Maybe keep going down. I'll tell you when to stop. I just want to make sure that we get to a couple. Stop on that one, Jeff, if you don't mind. So post claim, and again, I know this sounds obvious, right? But it's really important. Your first agent, one of your first calls, if not the first call, should be your insurance agent. And this kind of ties in to the claim process going smooth, right? If you involve your agent in that process right away, not only does it let us get the claim set up in a way that's most efficient and hopefully results in a smooth process, but it also gives us the chance to involve ourselves intimately. And what I mean by that is when you're working through the claim, of course, part of that claim is going to be the adjuster coming out to inspect the property. And what I would encourage you to do if you have significant damage is to invite your agent on that inspection. I went on essentially every one of these with our clients after 2017, after Irma. And first of all, it's perfectly reasonable to ask that of the agent. And second of all, it can be very meaningful, because when you're working through a claim, particularly if it's a little bit gray, maybe it's somewhere potentially in between a property claim and a flood claim, and or something like that, having your agent there to navigate some of the questions that the adjuster is going to ask you can be invaluable, right? Because the questions that they ask, there can certainly be words and phrases that we're not hiding anything, but maybe we want to avoid or phrase in a particular way that makes sense for the association. So having your agent there is really meaningful, and again, perfectly reasonable to ask. Next one, Jeff. Oh, we touched on that, the public adjusters. So I added a couple of slides, and these are not necessarily hurricane preparedness, but this is what's on everyone's mind, right? We've had 3 years of literally the most difficult insurance market in the history of the state. Our agency was founded in 1919 in Delray, so 106 years. We have agents that have been actively doing this, working with community associations for 60 years. And the consensus is that what we just went through is literally the worst market that Florida's ever seen. And a big reason for that, and if you've taken some of our courses in the past, you've definitely heard me regurgitate this statistic because it does a great job of summarizing the problem. It comes from our insurance commissioner, and in his report last year, he included a statistic that's amazing. And the statistic was that Florida buys about 9% of the property insurance in the country, but about 76% of all of the property insurance in the United States takes place in Florida as of last year. So unbelievably disproportionate. Now, I'm emphasizing that because the trend is positive for the first time in 3 months. Our state passed some legislation January 1st of last year, and we're starting to see a positive effect on the insurance market. So to give you an idea, Citizens, and I'm going to get a little closer, Jeff, because I have to read this slide. But Citizens, so in 3 years, Citizens, the state market, has grown from 300,000 policies to 1.7 million in Florida. So dramatic growth, because the private market has gotten so out of control. What the industry is anticipating is that this year, 354,000 policyholders will be able to find coverage outside of Citizens. So what that means is that because the litigation is trending positively, carriers are coming back to Florida. That is critical. We've been saying for 3 years, the heart of the issue is that carriers are leaving. We just need carriers to come back, because there's been no competition. The only reason these insurance companies have been able to take 30, 40, 50% year-over-year increases is because there's been no competition. So we're starting to see that change. I don't want to be overly optimistic. I always say I'm cautiously optimistic, because we have a really critical hurricane season coming up, but if everything goes smooth, I think we're trending the right way. This is very general and very broad, but the past maybe 7 or 8 renewals that we've done in the past month, 2 months have been much more favorable. I mean, flat year over year to the 10-15% range. So man, it's been a while since we've seen flat year over year renewals. So it's trending the right way. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So I know that's what's on everyone's mind, and I kind of wanted to end our conversation with, it's getting better. It's been a long 3 years, but I'm cautiously positive for the first time in a while. So I know that's a lot of information, and I know we're right at the 12 o'clock mark, but I'm happy to open it up for questions, or if there's anything specific we want to make sure that that we touch on, I'm happy to.
Somebody wanted a point of clarification, and then folks, go ahead and start typing in your questions.
Perfect.
And I see somebody with a hand raised. We're not verbalizing the questions. Type your questions into the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and lower your hands right now. So type your questions into the Q&A. And Andrew, sorry for the interruption. Your turn, buddy.
So Sherry, well, and I get it. Sherry wanted to clarify that statistic and make sure she heard the numbers right. I know it sounds crazy, Sherry, but yes, you heard the numbers right. It's up until recently, Florida has purchased 9% of the property insurance in the country, but has been responsible for 76% of the insurance litigation. So, you know, that's what the industry's been up against.
Okay. And before the next question, Andrew. Oh, but there's a but. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to go to a different question.
Oh,
so
real quick. Yeah, I see William mentioned that the link was not working for him. Something I failed to mention that I usually mention is that we have a couple of hundred of you on here today. So it's kind of like when you sign up for Ticketmaster notifications and you want to be one of the first to get those Taylor Swift tickets. Everybody's trying to get those tickets at the same time, and the website just seems to be spinning and spinning and spinning, and you can't get those tickets. Unfortunately, I don't have that problem with Mets tickets because they're playing so badly, but you may have that problem with this evaluation now with a couple of hundred of you trying to fill it out at the same time. So save that link, try it again in a few minutes, maybe text it or email it to yourself. I just tested it out and it works for me on 3 different browsers. So again, today is a tough day.
It looks like William has it working too.
Yeah, with weather and Wi-Fi issues. So today's going to be a tricky day. We've all frozen up a few times. So hang on to that link and try it again a little bit later. Andrew, back to you for the next question.
Sure. So Terry is asking, what's our association liability if I let residents come to the clubhouse during a storm rather than evacuate? I don't think there's any additional liability associated there, Terry. I mean, from the insurance perspective, at least, there's nothing in the policy that prohibits that or excludes that. So, you know, I mean, unless your specific policy has some language like that, but I've never seen that. So I'm monitoring. I think that's going to be it for questions, unless there's any more that that come in here.
Okay, that just means that you were very specific and did a great job with presenting the material. Crystal clear to me. I understood everything. So again, as always, you did a fantastic job, Andrew. And before I answer some technical questions for everybody and go over the evaluation one more time, Andrew, please tell everybody how folks can contact you. What is the best way to get in touch with you over at Plastridge?
Yeah, so I think in that PDF with the slides, all of my contact information is on there. But for those, I guess maybe I'll send an additional slide just with that, and maybe we can circulate that. But email, phone. I mean, I'm always available. My cell's on there, so anytime.
Sounds great. And it looks like Stephen has a question. A couple of more questions came in, so have at it.
Sure. So, okay, so loss assessment question from Stephen. Does the $2,000 assessment that you were talking about go to the association? So I think Stephen's referencing loss assessment coverage. I should have clarified the $2,000 number is the minimum, Stephen. So every policy is going to have at least 2,000. Some are going to have more than that. But no, when the owner submits that loss assessment claim to their personal carrier, their personal lines carrier is going to cut that check to the owner. That does not go to the association. Next question is from Lewis, and it says, if a roof was repaired, then a storm comes and causes damage to a unit, would the roofer's insurance have some responsibility since they supposedly corrected the issue? So I want to make sure I understand this question. If a roof was repaired, then a storm comes and causes damage. Well, Lewis, unless there's something that the roofer did wrong, right? I mean, if they didn't protect, if they're in the middle of the project and they didn't protect the roof or something like that, that's usually going to fall in the insurance. Most of these roofers are going to have language in the contract that that holds them harmless for storms and that sort
And, okay. And I see Marielle's typing Sherry's answer to that question. We're going to go over that again in just a moment. So Andrew, once again, I know you have appointments. I know you have things to do. Thank you so much for presenting today. We hope to have you back again with us very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate everyone's time. I know this is everyone's busy, but this is important, and particularly with the technical difficulties, I appreciate everyone sticking it out.